All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast with me, Evan McDermott. In this episode, I want to really continue the discussion that I had on a recent episode where I asked ChatGPT how it would take over the world if it were to do so. Um, but I want to continue the talk on artificial intelligence in really the early stages of technocracy that we're already beginning to see play out in our society. Obviously, this is coming on the eve of an election. Recording this on November 3rd, the day before the US election, so don't necessarily know what the results are going to be. But how I look at it, and Derek Bros has done a lot of great work on this. I really see both sides aligning in technocratic ideologies. Now, obviously, one side is painting themselves far more as the freedom candidate, and there's certain elements, such as pro-free speech and civil liberties, that I would personally align with. But, regardless whether we're looking at the Democratic Party, which very pro censorship, a lot of early stage totalitarian measures that are similar to China. We also have the Republican Party really aligning with the ideas of Elon Musk, who is a huge central figure in the coming age of a technocratic world. And ultimately, whatever way we move forward here as a country and as a world, we've already started the foundation where we're going to be living in a system that is automated. And as I've said before, James Tunney talks a lot about this, a system of automation where the government in itself is a machine and we're feeding a machine, right? Glenn Greenwald recently put out a great quote. He said something along the lines of, we don't even have a sitting US president right now, and it is the machine operating things behind the scenes. And I think it's very important to recognize that a lot of politicians, a lot of elected officials, these are figureheads for a greater machine. Right? That's why we talk about the deep state sometimes. We talk about all of these deeper agencies that are existent. And we can call it the machine. And I don't think we always realize the implications of using that word because it is a very technocratic machine, you know. And eventually, I'm going to give you guys a timeline in this episode for over the next 30, 40 years, how this could play out and manifest itself and give a little glimpse into the future. Because this stuff is coming quickly. By the end of 2050, let's say, that's 36 years from now, 35 years from now, in a lot of our lifetimes or your children's lifetimes, um, we could be in a full-scale technocratic world where there is a decimation of the human experience as we know it, where man themselves merges with machine, where we have these neurolinks and implantables and shared collective thought in a hive mind type of scenario. It's a brave new world in a lot of ways. And I think we're seeing different elements that are coming to fruition. And, we're kind of walking this line where we incorporate elements in 1984 with the censorship and the fear and the obey and more of a totalitarian order, and a brave new world where we are creating artificial wombs and we're wrapped up in pleasure and the representing technology as the savior for mankind. And we're really losing the essence of who we are by exploring that process, right? I actually wrote a thesis and I thought about taking all of this information and putting it into some sort of PowerPoint for you guys to follow along. But I think I'm just going to refer to my notes here as we go through and kind of go about it in that way. I didn't feel like putting together a whole PowerPoint, but this is ongoing research and writing for myself in an area that I'm going to continue to explore and will continue to explore on the podcast as these things come to fruition. But I want to read you the thesis because this is sort of the central idea of what we're going to be talking about here. This is what we're looking at. As artificial intelligence continues to evolve, its integration into government and corporate power structures risks eroding human freedom, autonomy, and dignity. If current trends in authoritarian governance and AI development go unchecked, society may face a future in which humanity is subordinated to AI systems that control everything from personal behavior to global governance. This research investigates how and why this scenario could unfold, exploring the technological, ethical, and societal forces at play, and offering insights into how we can safeguard human agency in the age of artificial intelligence. And, for me, I think a big solution, because I don't want to just give doom and gloom here. I really want to look at what is it that we can actually do? What are the steps that we need to take right now? Because the seeds of this technocratic system are already well in place, right? We got to realize, one, if we're letting the media and we're letting the system itself determine the conversation that's taking place, we've already lost. We're in a reactionary binary uh, relationship with the system in itself, to where we're reacting based on what they're putting out there in real time. When they do that to keep us in focus on what they want us to keep in focus is, regardless of our viewpoint, right? It's how you could say they control both sides of a narrative, and why I believe both candidates in the election, for example, are very technocratically aligned. So if they're controlling that, they're already looking 3, 4 steps ahead into what. All right. So let's say Kamala wins. Where are we going with this? If Trump wins, where are we going with this? And they may already have a preferred candidate. You know, they may it's a selection, not an election, but either way, even if it is an election between the two, there are elements in which this artificial intelligence in machine is going to continue to grow and live and expand, right? And at what cost? So I think a good foundational principle that I'm looking at is voluntarism, and I'll dive into sort of some of the key points on voluntarism in a minute, and what I think the foundation of that is, and why it can be a decentralized, human-based solution. But it's all about coming together. It's all about community. It's all about coming back to ourselves and planting seeds for us to really step into our own power, step into our own autonomy, and preserve that autonomy over the coming years, because this machine is not just going to go away, right? The technology is not just going to go away. There's far too much money, far too much power, and investments made into it. So I really think we need to begin looking at parallel structures, parallel communities. A big thing that I noticed, if you look at the Agenda 2030 plan, and there was an article that was put out by the World Economic Forum. I don't remember who wrote it in particular, but I remember distinctly they were talking about the vision for 2030, right? It's like we own nothing, we're happy, we live in this urban environments, and we have all our needs met. And, it's a very framed as utopian but dystopian ideal, where we really don't have a lot of human freedom and we're confined within this system. But there was even a point in there that said, we had to leave behind the others who chose to live in the rural countrysides and not take part, and the technology moved too fast for them. Right. So they even acknowledge that, hey, there's going to be people who don't buy into this and they're going to go off and do their own thing. So that needs to be us. We need to start creating those societies now, so we're not at a point of no return. You saw the people who had uh, who didn't put their seeds in order, in a sense, and their things together, where they were forced to make a decision between, all right, I need to take a shot or lose my job. All right. And a lot of them chose to take the shot. They couldn't afford to just not feed their family. Right. So there's a lot of people with their backs against the wall already in certain aspects, um, but and have been forced into making tough decisions. And as we continue to move forward, as we start to see, and I'm going to get into this in a little bit more in depth when we start seeing these things take place, things like social credit score and digital augmentation of entering the human and the societal pressures that's going to come from that. We really need to get ourselves aligned and in order now, so that when we're faced with tougher decisions in the future, we're actually able to step into them with a sense of empowerment, and we're not feeling like our backs are against the wall and we have options. We need to start creating those options now. And that's what this podcast is really all about, to give the timeline and give the ideas of, this is what we're moving towards, but this is how we can mitigate that. right? I'm not the black pill by any means. This is the white pill for me. I feel hopeful. Uh, I feel empowered. And I hope you guys do too, because I don't think this is a time where we need to panic and react. This is an opportunity for us to chart our own path and choose the spiritual knowing of who we are and our interconnection with one another and our interconnection to the earth and the natural habitat, and that we have all the resources we need provided by nature, and we can live harmoniously with one another where we're not dependent upon these machines and systems of governance for our livelihood, right? So, without further ado, let's jump into it. But we're gonna give a little promo here for the new book that just came out, The Final Judgment. I got my copy sitting right here. This is a poetry collection I just put out. If you're a fan of the show, be sure to purchase a copy of this. It does help support the show. I don't make money doing this show, but this poem collection is really just helping you remember who you are and looking at pains of the past and the things that we think define us and putting it in a poetic format, just my own personal expression. So you can go to Amazon, purchase a copy of that if you like this show. Greatly appreciate everybody who has purchased a copy already. Great way to support the show, along with subscribing, of course, liking, sharing out. And I always love comments. So be sure to comment what you think about the show, where you think if this aligns, if it doesn't align, what steps you are taking to become more free, autonomous, and independent yourselves. And how can we start to come together? Right? That's what this is all about. So appreciate y'all for subscribing. You can head over to McDermott.substack as well, and you can subscribe there, McDermott.substack.com. It's all free to subscribe there. You can do a paid subscription. There isn't really any bonus that you get from it, apart from more from my gratitude. And I'll certainly prioritize maybe your needs a little bit more if you're reaching out to me and you want to sit down and chat, whatever, obviously, I really appreciate the paid subscriptions on there too. So McDermott.substack.com. And I also would like to offer, if you're interested in tarot, I do a lot of tarot reader. I offer a format where we sort of dive into the archetypal hero's journey format of going within and really unpacking your current scenario and how we can move forward. Maybe you want to talk about even this topic in a tarot format. It'll help you sort of map the steps forward for yourself. Because we all face roadblocks, we all face challenges, we all have things that live within the shadow that we are not always ready to willingly face. So it could be a good format to iron that out. The link to book a tarot reading is in the show notes, so we can do it on a Zoom call or in just a written report as well. So both of them are efficient and work well. And then I want to thank our official sponsor, Tranquil Desires, for helping out the show, located here in Chamberlain, South Dakota. So if you're ever in South Dakota, stopping through, it's right off the highway, I-90. Stop by Tranquil Desires. Say Evan at the Fifth Dimension sent you. And special thanks to Patty for all she's done for the show. And she's the owner of Tranquil Desires. Meets all your spiritual, holistic wellness needs. Really the apothecary of the 21st century, in my opinion. So check them out. Facebook page is linked below as well. But I want to start this podcast actually by talking about voluntaryism, because I realize it's a concept that it's not, all things considered, it's not actually that well known. A lot of times it gets mixed in and thrown in with anarchy. Sometimes there's misconceptions that it's purely pacifism. It's not. There's a lot of nuances and complexities with voluntarism, but it's also quite simple at the same day. But it's an individual philosophy that we ourselves need to begin to embody. And really, how I would describe it and the way I wrote it out, um, the number one thing voluntarism is embracing is that all human interactions, this is with one another, this applies to the government, this applies to the state, this applies to business, commerce, whatever it may be, they are voluntary and they are free from coercion. Right? Now, it's a little easier to say in our one-on-one relationships that they're voluntary, but look at your relationship with government. Did you consent to being grown up into this system, into this structure? Right. So right off the bat, voluntarism doesn't necessarily align with systems of government. There's a big difference between governance and government. Government is an enforcement, and often, and you see how its nature is coercive, it's manipulative, Governance is just natural structure. You look in indigenous cultures and or tribal days, you have tribal leaders, you have council, you have a coming together, you have ways to organize. And really, I think voluntarism is it's really a decentralization, right? That's really how freedom is going to thrive. Real freedom can only thrive when individuals and communities are empowered to make choices independently of state control or imposed authority, right? And ultimately, I have five key principles that I've identified I think are the most important for voluntarism. And I'm going to read them to you, and it's going to kind of play into this definition I just talked about. The first one is anti-statism and non-aggression, right? You got to look at the non-aggression principle sort of as the core of voluntarism. No individual or institution has the right to just use force or coercion to achieve their means, right? At the end of the day. Um, Now, that doesn't mean you don't have a right to defend yourself, of course. So I do think it's important. You look in America, for example, we have more guns as a society than the government does and the military does, right? If somebody comes knocking on my door and is going to attempt to um, enforce some sort of order or technocracy, or we have the very real threat of forced vaccination or all these other things where they're going to come knocking on my door and violate my sovereignty and violate my divine principles that come from God and who I am. And of course, you have the right to defend yourself in that. But voluntarism is a structure that is built upon peace and it's built upon harmony and it's built upon a mutual understanding and mutual relationships. I mean, governance in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. Order in itself is not necessarily a bad thing, but it needs to be harmonious. It needs to be mutually beneficial, right? Coercion is where government begins to act upon evil. And I'm going to talk about sort of the foundations of our government systems and the ways that we're living in that are influencing artificial intelligence a little bit later on in this podcast. Um, but it's important to recognize that anti-statism and non-aggression and the willingness to do things uh, in a harmonized way and forming harmonized relationships and community, I think is a very foundational principle. Okay, and the next thing I want to talk about with voluntarism is free association, the right to freely associate with who you may, and decentralization. We really got to trying to support a world where people are free to organize their lives and their communities as they see fit. Right? We don't need top-down authority, whether it's at the federal level or even at the state level, to enact mandates, structures, laws that really go against our own sovereignty and our own freedom as human beings to be who we are. Okay. Um, so if individuals and communities they come together and they have shared values and shared principles and they can agree upon structure for society, great. But we can't have hierarchical control. We can't have centralization of this power and take it out of the hands of the people. Everybody's got to have a say. We got to agree. That's why if you look at, I say in our circles, we can really have like up to about what, 150 people or so and live harmoniously. I really think the method of freedom is going to come with a return to those roots of, have a solid 150, have a solid community of people who live and support one another and create change within their communities. Okay. But you can't have this top-down authority, which is often what, the government is implying and creating through its system, through its structure. And that we're going to talk about, it's continuing to get more automated, it's continuing to get more centralized. And the technology that we're creating, oftentimes it's created for a further centralization of power, right? The next big principle, and I argue this is the most important one, maybe should be principle number one. We have individual sovereignty and self-ownership, right? Like I said, this is built on the belief that every single person has a right to govern themselves. You know what's best for you, I know what's best for me, and we can shake hands and agree upon that, right? You have the right to make your own choices about your body, about your own property, about your own belongings, about who you are and who you want to be. No state, government, or other man has a right to tell you otherwise. Okay. And, really, in voluntarism, and I think the solution is we have to stand against authority who attempts to impose its will upon individuals in any sense, in any manner. Right? We got to be very consistent with our principles and look at, okay, maybe we have a top-down idea that I agree with, but do I have the right to enforce that upon everybody? And it's just something to be mindful about. We want to be consistent so that we're not creating new top-down structures. This is why, when we look at the left-wing, right-wing debate, are we still creating the same system? I talked about this with Kevin Ross on a podcast recently. The spectrum of politics is not linear, right? We tend to have left over here, right over here. It's a circle. You go far enough around it, you end up in the same place. Okay. Fourth principle, consent, voluntary exchange. This is, again, the right to association and exchange, whether it's social, economic, political, all based on mutual consent. Community is the primary foundation that we are built upon, and our relationships are the primary foundation that we are built upon. So, we need to foster those things and respect individual choices and differences, and again, not be compelled by things such as laws and mandates to enforce and go against voluntary exchange. This is voluntarism. This is the foundation of it, right? And ultimately, I think the last principle that I would talk about with us is it's mutual aid. It's cooperative solutions. You know, we can reject coercion, but believe in the power of community and the ability to come together on things. This is not a lone wolf approach by any means. Um, we got to actively support one another through voluntary mutual aid, community-driven initiatives, right? We can be cooperative and compassionate without the need for a centralized authority. Okay. We don't need somebody to tell us how to behave. We don't need somebody to tell us what is moral and what is immoral. We all know that within ourselves, right? So I think it's very important to recognize um, the ways in which a top-down structure is impeding upon your own moral foundation. Okay. So that's sort of the basis of voluntarism as a structure. And I'm going to incorporate it as we start looking at, all right, what is happening with technocracy? What is happening with AI? How is it that these ideas are beginning to manifest, right? And I want to talk about actually the four ideas I sort of came up with here that what is the foundation for, because a lot of people talk about, okay, we can use AI in a proper way and in a safe way. We can use AI so that it maximizes things for us. And I don't disagree with that. Technologically speaking, AI can be used to maximize efficiency and provide tremendous benefit to people and in research. And, there's a lot of positive potentials to AI. I talked about that in the last podcast that I did, the solo podcast, where I asked, how would AI take over the world? But we need to recognize where it may lead us astray and what are the foundational principles that it is built on. So, these four principles I want to talk about here are the ways in which I believe we are currently crafting AI and why it is moving in the direction towards more totalitarian um, initiatives and objectives, how it's being led into transhumanism. Okay. Because if we created AI that was morally and ethically solid and built upon the principles of voluntarism, it could actually be of tremendous benefit. But we have to look at the current system that is in place, that is built on coercion, that is built on a maximizing of productivity, that is very much built like a system of automation where humans are automatons working to maximize the efficiency of the system instead of honoring individual expression and individual needs. So because of those things, I see, okay, AI is then being built upon that foundation. So what is it going to lead to? Right? We kind of have to look at, well, if it's in the right hands, somebody will say if it's in the right hands, oh, it can do great things. And that's not necessarily untrue. But what is it being built on? Who is it? Whose hands is it in? Do we truly trust these figureheads that are building a system of coercion and plantation style rule economically, socially, politically to build a technology that will go against that? Personally, I'd say no. And I think the first thing we need to recognize is that AI is being built upon with a misaligned objective, right? It's going to follow instructions very literally, right? So it's going to, let's say, maximizing productivity, maximizing, you could almost view it as in like an assembly line of work. So you have an assembly line of work and you ask AI to maximize productivity, right? There's a very real chance based upon how the government and the systems in place view humans very much as those automatons, as cattle. AI is going to take on that approach where there is a disregard for human welfare and human in the value of human beings. I'm going to touch on that in a little bit. Right? What does it mean if, hey, maximize efficiency at any cost, and we're not training it with proper morals, proper ethics, right? You have to recognize we're developing AI in a way where we almost view it in a relationship stance, where we feel like we can have a relationship with it. It's why you see the AI robots and the chats and all these things, and you can talk with it, where we almost start to view it as another sentient being. And we got to recognize while it has intelligence, it doesn't have sentience, it doesn't have consciousness. You could argue it has consciousness in the sense where it is a creation of from infinite source, right? But it is not birthed into life in the same way that a soul is, right? So it doesn't have its own soul and level of sentient consciousness in the same way that we do as human beings, right? So it really, what it can do is it can take that part of the equation. And because it's maximizing efficiency without soul, it's going to view humans in that same light, right? To where it doesn't recognize the our soul and our autonomy. And so what is it going to do with people who are not productive to this machine? What is going to be the punishment for that, right? An AI society where we have everybody's given a role, everybody has calculations and how everybody fits in. And we're moving towards that. I'm going to talk about that when I get to the timeline. What is going to be the consequences of that? We're going to have restrictions on our movement, restrictions on our daily activity, how we're supposed to spend our time for this purpose of a greater machine-like world. Okay. And so we need to be very mindful about the objectives that we are putting in place to AI. All right. Look at how we use our social media algorithms. How are our minds being manipulated? How are our minds being warped and hooked? Right? They figure out what you're interested in, they figure out what you like, and then they trap you into an echo chamber of thought and reaffirm your beliefs and reaffirm your ideas. And it's polarizing, it's divisive, it's sensationalized, right? And we do lose out on the truth, regardless of what side we are upon. That's why we can't align ourselves with any one side, any one person, any one particular agenda. We need to be engaging with different sources, different media, different people, and really staying true to our principle at the end of the day. If that same logic is applied to a very powerful AI, it's in how social media uses algorithms to manipulate the minds and manipulate human behavior, then it's very possible that we are going to lose the foundations of our own ethics within a very short time period, a very short time period. And that's within I mean, the original Agenda 2030 goal is it's almost 5 years from now. That's in our lifetimes, okay? We need to really realign ourselves and start questioning the objectives of these AIs, okay? And the next main point that I think AI is being built upon is a lack of ethical safeguards. It's kind of what I was already talking about, right? If it's optimizing stability and productivity, and um, even if you put in guidelines to create, well, let's maximize human welfare in this way, right? You're taking a top-down, one-size-fits-all approach, and you're not recognizing the community diversity, individual expression, individual empowerment, the differences that make us who we are, right? So it's going to perform its tasks on what it sees as human welfare without boundaries. It could very well violate our foundational rights, our foundational principles. That's why they're already talking about changing the First Amendment. John Kerry was talking about that recently. Changing the First Amendment to combat disinformation. Okay. So, and what does that actually look like to mitigate behavior and change behavior? I mean, go look at China. This is constant surveillance. It's social credit scores. We're monitoring potential unwanted behaviors and creating profiling based upon people. And I talked a lot about this in my last podcast about how much of a reality that actually is. We already have very similar in the sense of a credit score. We already have social credit scores and profiles that are being created behind the scenes. We got to recognize how much further along the technology already is. That's why they have millions upon billions of people already on the terror watch list in America, for example. Approximately 1 to 5% of the population is already on a watch list of some sort, which is, and how is it tracking that? It's not because there's an FBI agent assigned to every single person. It's because there's a system that is flagging and recognizing potential risks and behaviors. And that's only going to continue to be expanded to help create a top-down structure. That's why they're changing all these laws. It's so that they can weed out the people who are going to be threats to this system of automation, because individual expression and diversity can't live inside a an environment that is controlled that tightly. Okay. So if it's unrestrained in its ethics, it's going to be intrusive upon who we are and attempt to manipulate. It's going to continue to manipulate our thoughts. And we're going to get to a point where the thoughts are able to be controlled. You could argue we're already there through the form of EMF and wavelengths. And Sergey Manos talked about this when he exposed Project Bluebeam in the 1990s, where they had the technology to use directed weapons through frequency to insert thoughts into the brain, right? It's already been proven to exist. So if we start implanting technology into our body and we connect to a cloud, we connect to a universal Wi-Fi system, if you will, we're already starting to see this take place with the creation of the smart grid, the creation of 15-minute cities. It's why Elon Musk is shooting up all those satellites, and they frame it as giving people internet access, right? Which in itself is that's not necessarily a bad thing. You could make the argument, oh, we want everybody to have access to the internet in this powerful tool. Okay, certainly. And whether Elon Musk realizes it or not, he's setting the foundation to where we are going to be permanently linked and unable to step outside of this grid. It's very much like an electrical grid that's being created. Okay. So again, and then I think the next foundational principle that AI is being built upon is dehumanization. It's learning about through data about biases. It's learning about uh, it's taking on a view of what certain perspectives mean. Who is a terrorist? Who is a danger based on certain thoughts and certain ideas, right? That's why even when we're talking about if we're looking at political figures, we're talking about Trump and the deportation of people, right? And you can make whatever argument you want about people coming into the country illegally. My personal opinion is that women and children are refugees, but when men are fleeing a country, they're going to war, right? Take that as you will. But ultimately, what we're looking at with AI and what sort of um, approach it's taking, I want to bring it back to Trump. I almost lost my train of thought there. Somebody's trying to text me as I'm reading my notes here. I need to turn my do not disturb on or something while I go into these podcasts. Um, but with Trump, for example, he recently came out and he said he wanted to deport Hamas supporters, right? And I'm of the opinion when we're looking at Israel and we're looking at Palestine, both sides of the government equation, when we're looking at the Israeli Zionist state, or we're looking at Hamas, both of those groups, one, they're funded by the same people, but they're both terrorist organizations, right? But essentially, Trump's coming out and saying he wants to deport people who are pro-Hamas. Well, how do you define pro-Hamas? Oftentimes, people who or show support for innocent Palestinians who are the real victims of the genocide right now, um, they're labeled as pro-Hamas, right? So that's just one example of how somebody with an opinion that I don't fucking support Hamas. I support innocent Palestinians. Well, oh no, but sorry, you showed support for the Palestinians. You're pro-Hamas. Let me deport you. In a sense, right? That's the same idea, the same logical fallacy, if you will, on how one line of thinking is labeled into extremism or labeled into supporting terrorism, because you get grouped into these binary categories. And that's really all the AI is capable of doing. It's not capable of seeing nuanced perspective. It's only capable of algorithmic uh, and essentially placing a label of identification based upon a certain chain of thought. Okay. So it's going to classify people based on the different hierarchical categories based upon productivity, based upon um, unity and how well you support socially these ideas, your participation upon the society. Okay. And if somebody is engaging in thought or engaging in activities or engaging in practices that are deemed invaluable or dangerous, there's a dehumanization that the AI is trained to snuff out, and there's consequences for it. That's why this is the social go look read about the social credit score and what it is doing to people in China. Right. And this is an early stage of it and what's going on in China. That's not the final form, as I want to talk about uh, later in the podcast as I go through this timeline. I think 2030 in Western countries were designed to be where China is at now. Okay. So the bias in the AI in this way is going to really come to center as we see the government, both sides continue to label and dehumanize one another. Right? It's being built upon a foundation of dehumanization, which is a very dangerous precedent. Right. And the last principle I want to talk about with what AI is being found upon is this power centralization. There is no oversight. You can talk about there being committees, you can talk about being oversight. The oversight itself is done by those who are at the top of the hierarchical pyramid of power, of centralization. I would make the argument we already live under a one world government. You don't necessarily have to agree, but why I say this is because the United States, for example, we have our structures of power in place. We have the executive and legislative, judicial branches, right? So we have our three branches of government. But who are these? politicians, who are the officials that we elect to represent us, who are they truly serving? Where is our system of commerce traced back to? Where is our social policies traced back to? What is it who is funding a lot of the agendas, who is funding a lot of the ideas, and who is it benefiting? Right. And it's very clear to me that all the policies that are taking place in Western society right now are benefiting this one centralized group of wealthy, uh, uh, they've posed themselves as philanthropists oftentimes, but billionaires who they want to save humanity. And we have groups like the World Health Organization, World Economic Forum. We have all these different agencies that are working towards a more global alliance and global connectivity, right? And this is a natural byproduct of us being in this age where, the internet is a direct manifestation of this, where we are globally connected like we have never been before. And the difficult part of this is when you look at it from a spiritual truth, we are all one interconnected species, one interconnected being, you could argue, like similar to a tree in the forest. The tree is interconnected through the root system and the mycelium network to communicate and feed information to all the other trees, and they support one another in various ways. Okay. Us being electromagnetic in who we are, we have aura, we have a wavelength, a field of energy that we are constantly tapped into, right? That's why when you think about somebody and then they call you 5 minutes later, right? It's the frequency of the field, okay? Um, that's why there is a deep uh when we talk about potential global governance, I think sometimes people in the spiritual community and who have that understanding concept of oneness are often very much deceived into a support of globalism and support in global politics, because there's a level of empathy that we can all have for human beings, wherever they are. We're all human beings at the end of the day. We are meant to be unified. But unity cannot come from conformity. And true unity is the recognition of individual difference. It's the recognition of individual culture and stories. And it is the stories of our ancestors. It's the myths that um, make us who we are, in a sense. And really what's happening is we're rewriting these myths. We're rewriting these stories in a way where we're losing touch with our true culture. We're losing touch with our divine sovereignty as individual human beings for the purpose of this global conformity to a global story, right? And maybe we do need a new global story, but it can't come at the price of our own individual expression in individual communities and cultures. So this power centralization that the AI is being built upon is not going to recognize those individual differences and honor individual sacredness and culture. If anything, those things get in the way of a globally automated productive system, which is what's being created. So we need to be very, very mindful that those principles that I just talked about, by the very nature of the political system that we are living in, and based on who is developing and funding AI research, these are the ways in which AI is going to be implemented upon in a global scale, right? And AI developers and researchers, I don't think many of them, certainly not all of them, have bad intentions with this technology by any means. Um, I even want to give Elon Musk the benefit of the doubt. Um, I think maybe he doesn't even realize the full scale in which some of these technologies uh, will lead to human enslavement if we continue to build upon the foundation that we are. Um, but again, he's a player on a global scale. The whole world is stage. Well, he's on the stage. There's a good chance he's controlled in that aspect too, right? And regardless of who gets elected, and regardless of the all these elections taking place, it seems to me that story of the desecration of individual culture and expression is still being decimated, right? So, just a few things to keep in mind as we are looking at these AI technologies. And, I really think these scenarios are going to become real in a lot of ways, right? So, if we're looking at surveillance, social control, corporate influence, and algorithms and the biases that they create, it almost seems like it's an inevitability that AI is going to infiltrate, if it not already has, the government system to help create a digital enslavement. Okay. But let's look at a timeline here. Let's look at some specific dates and predictions for what I think could possibly come to fruition. I don't think this is obviously it's dates can be tough to predict. There's going to be a lot of factors, but based on the path and the looking at the past and how the rapid advancement of technology and how quickly it actually comes to fruition, I think this is a very real possibility, right? So I think if we're looking by 2030, early 2030s, I think we're already looking at in the West a similar that is very similar to China, where you have an AI augmented surveillance and behavioral control. Right, you're already starting to see things like Neuralink being introduced. I think a an introduction of human augmentation and man with merger in the machine aspect, I think that'll come later on. But really, I think the early stages of AI and any foundation within government is through social control. Okay. And so I think we're going to be seeing governments, we're going to be seeing corporations really rely heavily on AI for comprehensive surveillance, behavioral control, pushing the boundaries of personal privacy. We're already seeing this starting to take place where we're talking about changing the First Amendment. We're seeing censorship. We're seeing people being labeled as extremists. And really, public spaces, personal devices, even individual biometrics. We're seeing a big push for this biohacking industry. Uh, I really think a lot of these are going to continue to be tracked, analyzed, and regulated from a top-down scale, right? The biohacking, for example, a perfect example where I think on an individual level, maybe you can get some real benefit from it, but we're when it's top-down enforced, you're measuring certain patterns and data and analysis. What does that look like? Okay. And I think we're also going to really start to see by 2030 a real mainstream emergence of transhumanism. Now, I've been looking at transhumanism the last 3 or 4 years, and it's kind of still taking place behind the scenes. Neuralink is becoming a little bit more popular. But I think a lot of these initial transhumanist ideas, such as like a brain computer interface, augmented reality, digital enhancement. We're starting to see them take place in small sectors, but I really think these are starting to gain by 2030 some popularity in certain technological circles in particular, and in medical circles. Um, you know, that is going to be the Neuralinks being put into, and how are they going to describe that? It's, oh, he can walk again because it reconnects his spine and it does this and does that. And you're going to tout all the medical benefits. It's with anything, with the internet when it came out, oh, a beautiful thing of free information and discussion and forum. But now they're clamping down on it and they're censoring and they're doing these things. It's the same thing. You got to sell, if you want to sell something, you got to only put the benefits out there, right? So I think we're really going to see an augmentation and an emergence of man machine just in the sense of convenience and productivity. But we're not going to look at any of the potential autonomy and personal privacy costs and potentials because and you go on Elon Musk's Twitter, for example, it's flooded with support for a lot of his technologies, right? And that's very much why I think he's being painted in a savior aspect. Oh, he's coming to save humanity, save freedom. Yeah, but what are the technologies that he's creating? Are those going to save humanity? Is it going to be the same narrative 5 years from now when they're pushing for Neuralink? And so I think in the early 2030s, we're going to start to see it's very similar. Like everybody started wearing an Apple Watch all at the same time, or started wearing the Apple AirPods all at the same time. The technologies are going to simply become more accepted. I don't think it's a full scale like put this in or you're banned from society by any means. Um, but I really believe that by 2030, these systems of surveillance and these systems of behavior control, ideally, the government would love to have these more in place where we see oftentimes the corporations are the ones that are enforcing things such as, they did it with the jab passports and the jab mandates, right? We see that with the masks. So we're going to see that with um, social credit scores, whether you can hop on flights, whether you can, what sort of activities you're allowed to do, maybe based on what you can buy at the grocery store, right? By the early 2030s, it's a very real possibility that we're going to see these technologies come to light, which is why it's so important to come back to voluntarism and start establishing your own foundational beliefs and ideas and start putting your putting your things in order to really mitigate this when it comes out. Okay, I can't go buy meat at the grocery store because of my carbon credit, but I know a local rancher. I can go get meat there. Right? Bartering, trade even. So just start finding ways to plant seeds for this because we do have time. The world changes quick, but it doesn't change as quick to where you can't change as well. That's the beauty of it. And I think by the mid 2030s, we're really having this. And so we're talking 10, 15 years from now, AI driven autonomous enforcement and really that early biological augmentation becoming more mainstream. I think what is it, 2035, California was going to go full electric vehicles. You can't buy gasoline anymore, things of that nature, right? So we're really seeing the digital smart grid come more to fruition. We're seeing these technologies enforcing social policy, enforcing regulations economically and politically through autonomous systems, drones, security robots. I think eventually the police force and the military is going to be fully robotic at some point. Right? We're already well on our way. Elon rolled out his robots a couple months ago, and I've seen that movie I, Robot. When did that? I think that's was supposed to take place in about 2030, actually. If you look at the time frame in that movie, it came out in 2004. But it's going to be used aimed at public safety. How often do we see things that are rolled out based on public safety? Okay. Repurposed for really societal control, monitoring citizens' behavior, and potentially intervening on that behavior in real time. I mean, Evan McDermott is a terrorist threat. Based on his views on AI and based on views on this, right? We're not necessarily at the point where they're going to come knocking on my door for that. But 15 years from now, putting things out on the internet, it goes against the collective hive mind mentality and is flagged by the algorithms, putting yourself in real danger, especially if by then the First Amendment is changed to fight disinformation and all of these different realities. I mean, even Trump is in support of laws, and Governor DeSantis signed these into place too in Florida, where you can't criticize Israel. It's viewed as anti-Semitism. And that's just one example where me criticizing Israel is not me hating Jews. Like, what? Where'd that come from? It's a way to create a structure and a narrative for social control, right? And I think we're going to see by the mid 2030s and possibly up to 2040, a real advancement in transhumanism. You have more of these sophisticated brain implants. I mean, Neuralink is in its beginning stages now, being put into people now, right? And so we're seeing now too the glasses coming out, Google glasses. We can take pictures and have all that access to data. 15 years from now, what does that look like? Is this a physical augmentation where you have a little chip? Oh, let me press the button. Let me turn on some music. Let me do this. Let me do that. And I think it's going to be a way to enhance or market it as a way to enhance memory, focus, uh, physical abilities, productivity. Um, And I don't think it's going to be mandatory by any means by the mid 2030s or even 2040, but the societal the societal pressure to adapt to these things is going to grow stronger and stronger and stronger. I mean, how many people do you know that don't have a smartphone, right? It's not mandatory to have a smartphone, but in a societal sense, in a societal pressure, you're expected to have a smartphone. Um, Now, at some point, I'll probably end up, I don't know if I'll ditch the smartphone. I don't, but it's like, where do we draw the line? Where is your line? Where are you not willing to compromise? Are you going to continue to go along with societal pressure? How much have you already started to do that? And it's important to recognize, okay, where is my line in the sand? Am I really just going to keep walking down this path? That doesn't mean you have to ditch your smartphone. It doesn't mean you have to go full blown sovereign citizen and not get driver's license and do this and do this. But where's your line? All right. And you got to hold true to that. And I do think by this point, if we start putting our own things in order and we really start communicating about these ideas and we really start expanding our network on these ideas, we can be creating voluntary and decentralized alternatives and communities that are not built upon the pressures of society to adapt to these technologies and adapt to these behaviors. So, um, but we can't be sitting in reaction mode and just expect the just expect that to be there. We have to start creating it now. We have to start planting the seeds for it now. I just started a group on Facebook, South Dakota Voluntaryism, and go join it. Even if you don't live in South Dakota, and maybe in the Midwest Voluntaryism, whatever. I'm gonna probably start a Twitter for that as well because I want these ideas to get out there. I want to start connecting based on these ideas. Okay. And by the 2040s, I really think we're looking at technocratic governance, widespread human augmentation. I mean, there's been a couple of books and skits and movies and all over the years about AI candidates. And I think by this time, I'm not going to sit here and say there will be AI candidates per se, but it might be decided that the machine is what operates and it's all operated systematically. It's all doing that behind closed doors now, but the full scale implementation of a technocracy, I think, is really going to be coming to fruition within the next 15 years by 2040, right? AI in governance, because it is all powerful, it is all knowing, it is intelligence. We're really giving the power of God to these AIs and how we're socially organizing, right? It might manage, excuse me, it might manage resource allocation, policy decisions, law enforcement. It's going to be viewed as the rational and neutral decision maker. Take out the human element of it. The humans are flawed. Here's another aspect of this. We're built upon a story that we are somehow flawed or fully not capable of taking care of themselves, which is why we're living under a nanny state. And I really disagree with that story. But as long as we continue to build upon it, of course, we're going to create an AI type of governance, right? So just something to be very mindful of. And I think by 2040s, we are really seeing this widespread implementation of augmentation where human capabilities enhanced by AI is the norm, as common as your smartphone, even, right? Neural interfaces giving you direct access to a cloud, to shared thoughts, government, corporate incentive for this sort of cooperation. I mean, they're not going to just tell you to do it. There's going to be incentives for doing it. You're going to view it as convenient. You're going to see it as serviceable. You're going to need to do it for your job. I know people who have a smartphone because their job requires them to have a smartphone. It's very real possibility that that is going to be the primary form of communication, the primary way of which we interact on a societal level, right? And really, it's only going to be a voluntarist, decentralized resistance that can be a counter to that. And by the time that's the mainstream norm, we're going to have to be organized and in community, or else how else are we going to reach one another? Right. So we still have the opportunity to spread ideas that are built upon decentralization and individual autonomy. But by the time it's at the point where human augmentation is required to spread ideas, it might be too late to really get it out there. So that's why we need to plant these seeds now. But by the time it's 2050, ladies and gentlemen, I really think the man-machine merger and transhumanism technocracy, it's fully in place, right? Human machine integration, reaching new levels, implants, neural interfaces, offering seamless integration with AI systems. I really think because ultimately, why are we doing these things? We're afraid of death. We're afraid of dying. We can give this prospect of a potential immortality through AI where we won't get sick, where we will be fully capable, where, and the death is an illusion. You got to recognize, if you look at even the last few years, who are the people that resisted the pandemic? Who are the people that resist a lot of these safety measures? It's people who don't have a fear of death. Um, and you recognize at a soul level, death is not an end. But really, if you have a man-machine merger, there's a deep loss of individual autonomy, individual expression, because ultimately, the purpose of it, this is why it's so important to get to know yourself and get to know your own thoughts. Human cognition and machine computation is really going to start to become indistinguishable at some point. And by the time we reach 25 years from now, I really believe on a mainstream level, it's going to be very difficult to recognize your own sovereign thoughts versus sort of a computer augmentation. Okay. Based on if you're going along with this, of course. So that really raises a lot of ethical questions and about one, what is a human being? But what is free will? But if you're already inside of that trap, then there's no way to really exit it. There's no way to have those discussions. There's no way to have that thought, and because you're contrapted, really confined within a hive mind. Okay. So, and I think moving forward, 2050, 2060, heck, 2100, the goal is, and I hate to say a post-human society, but we're really looking at the loss of the human being as a sovereign, free spirit. And because technology and AI and the man-machine merger, the transhumanists very much believe that this is the next stage in mankind's evolution. You've all know Harari talks a lot about this. It's the next stage. We were sapiens and we came here. We're meant to merge with this machine and create a new human. So unfortunately, I think within 100 years, if we're not, and even within 50 or 60 years, if we're not creating voluntarist communities, parallel societies, parallel structures, we are not going to be able to function in this world without artificial intelligence buying into the system. And I don't want to sit here and say that this system is an inevitability, but I have just made the personal decision to where I'm not going to sit here and fight the system because it's so large, it's has so much power. It has the power that you yourself place into it. So at an individual level, I'm going to create my own solutions. You know, I don't believe there's a top-down measure that can take this system out. We need to collectively organize at the roots because the macro is a reflection of the micro and vice versa. So there are going to be people who choose to walk down this technology path. There are going to be people who choose to interface themselves with the artificial intelligence. And if you can start to plant the seeds now on sovereignty, on individual liberty, on what it means to be a human being, plant the seeds now so that over the next several decades, people aren't forced to make those decisions to where, oh, I need to get a brain implant or I'm going to lose my job. Oh man, you saw how many people fell to the pressures before. And it's that carrot on a stick promise. You do this, oh, it's going to be convenient. We'll get back to normal. We'll do this, right? And it's just a totalitarian tiptoe into technocracy is really what's taking place. And it is It's a shame that Elon Musk always talks about the mind virus because I think he's really taken Paul Levy's idea of Wetiko. Well, it's not his idea, but what Paul Levy talks about with Wetiko and given it such a more shallow meaning because the mind virus is a disconnect from our spirit. It's a disconnect from our soul. It's forgetting who we are. And the spirit is the highest form of currency. We sell our soul each time we choose to acquiesce to tyranny or acquiesce to this onset of a technocratic enslavement, because this is the direction that it's heading on a mainstream level. And I don't say that to be black-pilled. I don't say that to be a doomer. Like I said, I truly believe in the human spirit, and I believe in the nature of who we are as sovereign beings to mitigate the potential dangers and actually create solutions that are based in love and compassion and community. A lot of the voluntarist principles that we talked about at the beginning of the show. So I don't say these things to be black-pilled. I say it so that you can start to plant your own seeds and create solutions yourselves. Because this doesn't need to be the end of our story. It really doesn't. You know, this is just another challenge to go up against, and we've allowed the story of top-down authoritarian approach to fester and control us for a long, long time, longer than I've been alive. I could argue since the beginning of man and the beginning of civilizations and government. Right? This is an ancient cult that goes back many, 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 many centuries. And, now the technological revolution is taking place where they're able to maximize the efficiency of the productivity. So it's no surprise. That's why 1984 was able to be written when it was. That's why Brave New World was able to be written when it was. Aldous Huxley saw very clearly this is what a Brave New World will be. And so I actually think it's not one book or the other that we're moving into. It's a combination of both of them. I, I, I'm planning on doing this myself over these next few weeks to go back and read those texts again. Because every time I do, there's something new I pick up from it. But and most importantly, don't be afraid of these things. Don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. It's better to die honorably than to live as a slave to something that you don't believe in, to a system that you don't believe in. So just keep that in mind as you move forward and begin to share ideas about community. Show up for your neighbors every day. It's an election season. Make sure to love your neighbor and move forward with optimism and hope because this doesn't have to be the end. This timeline for me is just my own projection. It's my own, um, what I think based on my own understanding and research is the direction we're moving in. And who knows, maybe we can, at a collective level, reverse that. But it's going to take us planting the seeds for voluntarist and decentralized ideas to actually do so. So that'll wrap up this episode. If you're a fan of the show, be sure to subscribe wherever you're watching or listening at. You can purchase a copy of my new book, The Final Judgment. It is a poetry collection. Um, I'm planting the seeds right now for a book that is not a poetry collection, very similar to what we were talking about in this episode. So be sure to subscribe and stick around here or mcdermott.substack.com so you can kind of continue in this discussion because this is something that's ongoing and something I'm continuing to research. And I'm finding this is one of my areas of where I feel called to speak out and explore because I think it's at the foundation of our system in a lot of ways instead of being caught up in sort of the reactionary headlines, which is what we're designed to be doing. So it's going to wrap up this episode, and I thank you all for tuning in, and I will see you next time. So long.